Johnny, man, where were you when you heard the news about Chadwick?
My wife woke me up this morning, and she knew how much a fan I am of his work, and she woke me up and said, and she woke me up and showed me something on that thing. She said, Chad is gone. And I don't want to sound maudlin about this, but I did actually shed a tear, which is not something that I often do, because to me, death is really a transition from one form of life to another. So I really doesn't. But I was really, really stricken by the news of his death because of his contributions, because he was young, and particularly because of some of the roles that he played. One thing I can say about him was that I always recognized that if his name was on the picture, it was worth seeing, you know. and I think that's significant. Some people will play anything to get paid.
Right, yeah.
That wasn't him.
Yeah, man. It was, and I happened to be at a Black Lives Matter event. So I just but oh man, I just wanna I guess we should pour out some libations for
Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea.
So this is for Chadwick, man.
Yeah.
So I just the roles he played, especially of course the Black Panther, man, was just so iconic, and it was such a film that the Black community as a whole had gotten behind. You did see it. You went to see it.
Only 3 times. Wait a minute, that's 3 times in the movie, and I don't know how many times I've watched it since it was on. I think it's on Netflix or Hulu.
Okay.
How many times I've watched it since then?
What do you think? I've been seeing a lot of Facebook posts. What do you think we should take away from this? You know what I'm saying? Especially, I hear people now starting to talk about Wakanda and searching for Wakanda, trying to create a Wakanda. Do you think that's doable in this lifetime, especially with what we're seeing now in terms of Black political power on the rise?
I think it's absolutely doable, and I think that the significance of the movie Black Panther and his obviously his role in that was that it projects a message that has inspired us. I mean, it's still, until today, it's still one of the highest grossing movies in history.
Right.
And what it actually spoke to was it was a tie back to our past. You poured out libation for the ancestors, and that's what Wakanda was about, what Black Panther was about. It took us back to our ancestral beginnings, and it tied us with the future. It also spoke to me a very important message was, and this is, I think, is important for what you're asking, and that is that the fictional concept can be real, because what it speaks to is what would have happened had there not been
colonizers.
Exactly, the colonizers. What would have happened? And I think that the kind of fantastic things that were created on a fictional basis in that movie are very real. If we can just reimagine history and think in terms of what would have happened had we never come in contact with the colonizers, had we left to our own, had our young people, had not our intelligent people, our scientists, and all of us been stolen from that land. Had they stayed there and done what they did without interruption, I think it's easy to imagine that we would have been where we are. So I think it speaks specifically to our potential for power, and I didn't find it fantastic at all, not at all.
Right.
I think the other thing that we have to mention is that now, as a result of that movie and the wide viewing that it had, people, particularly Black people, now understand the importance of ancestral worship, ancestral service. The word worship is not our word.
Right.
We talked of the service to our ancestors. And what it was basically was to acknowledge the fact that our ancestors, we stood on their shoulders, and that our ancestors would be there always to guide us in the future and to protect us. And that was what that really spoke to. And I've never seen so many people. So I went to see it in the movies 3 times, not only for the story, but for the people I saw there. I mean, it was, I'm sorry, I get emotional about it, because we would dress up, we would wear African garb and dashikis, to go to the movies. Sisters would be in the gate. Why? What inspired that? Churches would go together just to see it, and they would all dress up in African garb. So what it said to me was that things are changing, but they're changing in a fundamental way, and that fundamental way is in our understanding of the value of our own culture and our ancestral heritage. And I think that of all the things that he did, that in my mind is what he will be remembered for well into the future.
Right. And it pays, and I think about Chad when I went to see it. Not a lot of people went to see Thurgood Marshall. I don't hear a lot of people talk about it, but that was a film. And I saw an interview with him talking about why he chose that role, why he thought that was such a pivotal role, because of who Thurgood Marshall was and what he embodied. And I think that was one of the Chadwick's greatest abilities, is to take these larger than life, our black icons, James Brown, he played Thurgood Marshall, to take this Jackie Robinson, to take these people who ushered in a new era of black pride, and he embodied them. He not only played that role, I heard Roland Martin say he was this generation's Denzel Washington. He embodied these people, and the things that he did, although they were biographies, and of course Black Panther was a fictional, but it all led to black empowerment. He got a body of work that he leaves behind that deals with nothing but black empowerment. You can watch any of these films and feel empowered by understanding what these real life people did for our people. And I think that's so pivotal. When I was listening to him give the interview about what Thurgood Marshall did, and understanding that through lawsuits, back when the NAACP were filing lawsuits after lawsuits, those lawsuits led the way for our freedom. And I think back to, I had a conversation, and I won't say this judge's name, but it's a judge at the federal level, and he was saying that he's inspired, and this is a white judge. He's inspired by the Black Lives Movement, but he's disappointed in the fact that they're not bringing forth federal lawsuits. And he talked about how 80% of all of the freedoms as black people in America, we got through the legal system, through justice. And he was saying, this is a Jewish brothers, of course, and saying that black people have been, we're so fearful of the court system and legal system, and we forget that there are a lot of judges on the bench that want to do good. They want to do justice. And he was saying that he was waiting for cases to be brought for him. He couldn't do anything if no cases get brought before him. And he was saying that we should be willing to keep bringing cases. This is how we end race. We're not going to end racism, but how we bring down institutional racism is we drive it from the institutions. And the only way to do that is through legal actions. And Thurgood Marshall embodied that. And it just showed that even in the height of the 60s, and the height of racial hatred, that there were white judges on the bench, because we're no black judges. These were white brethren who were true allies, who looked at a case and said, and administered the law, administered justice. I wouldn't say law, they administered justice. And we have to be willing, in terms of political leaders, we need to be willing to bring forth lawsuits to continue that work. And I think a lot of that goes to what you were saying about the movie Black Panther, how that it was a communities movie. It wasn't just a Marvel movie, it was a communities movie. That's right. And we came out to support as a community.
We did.
And it's a lot that can be learned in that, in terms of black politics and black business going out to support. Why don't we support black businesses like that? Yeah. Why don't we need to start supporting black elected officials with an authentic voice.
Yeah. There's so many levels to that truth that you've just spoken. But to sort of hit them seriatim. First of all, credit to Brother Chad for having selected those roles. And it's my understanding that people offered him roles, and that there was even one case where he spoke up about the portrayal or a particular role in which he was fired. Mm-hmm. And because he refused to play the part the way they wanted it, he thought it was demeaning. But that's the character of the actor, and that's the character of the person. But also to have a plan, and I don't know this to be a fact, but I bet my life on it, he had to select those things that he thought would be impactful. And so the selection of the story of about Thurgood Marshall is a stroke of genius, because as you say, everything that we've gotten, everything really significant, we've gotten ultimately through a lawsuit. Yeah, protests were important, marches were important, but the gritty, the down-to-earth, nitty-gritty work that was done was always done in the courts. And of course, the singular most important, which is not to demean or to lessen the impact or importance of other attorneys who were involved, and many of them were excellent litigators, but Thurgood Marshall had a plan. He had a strategy, and his strategy was when he started out, he went looking for cases where he could chip away at white segregation, at white supremacy. And so he worked his way up to Brown versus Board of Education. And part of what he did was bring in lawsuits that attacked issues that were important to our success. We can't get to political power if we can't vote. Right. But then just voting is not enough. We have to be able ultimately to determine the course of the political establishment. And that allows us or requires us to be in control of the leadership apparatus of the various parties, whether they're Democratic or Republican. And so the fight that Thurgood Marshall started, the selection for that role of Chad was, I believe, to emphasize the fact that exactly what you said, the things that have made us closer to freedom, not free, but made us closer to freedom, have always been done through the courts. Now, the problem with the court, of course, is that it takes time. There's an old saying that the wheels of justice turn exceedingly slowly. And I spoke with a judge who I can mention because he's deceased now. His name was Fritz Alexander. He was the first black Chief Justice of the New York Court of Appeals, which in New York is the highest court. And he told me one time, he said, what we need to do as a people, but he was talking to a group of lawyers. He said, what you need to do is stop dealing, this is crazy, but he said, stop spending so much time in the federal courts. Now remember, this is after the Board of Education and all of those. Stop spending so much time in the federal courts and bring your cases in the state courts, because we're sitting here, which is exactly what almost word for word what you said, the judge you talked to said. He said, we're sitting here waiting for the cases. We can't act unless you bring the cases. So the argument there that the Judge Fritz Alexander was making was to bring the cases and they will handle them. And that's what we have to understand. We have to understand that the battle is not over. And all of the things that are happening that help this battle and help us to move our quest for freedom forward have to do with the things that young people are doing. But the grunt, nitty-gritty work is in the courts. Somebody has got to sue. Somebody has got to force the argument from the standpoint of litigation in a court, either federal or state court, and has to force them to address the issues. Dr. King was basically saying that we have to force them, and I'm paraphrasing him now, but he was saying that we have to force them to live up to the words in the documents. Right. And you do that through the courts. The thing that I think we fail to realize is that the Declaration of Independence, which I quote frequently, and many people quote frequently, is not an organic law of the United States. It was good to get them their freedom, and then it was kicked off the side. They don't even pay attention to that now. But I don't believe, as Nikki Haley said, that this is not a racist country. That she said it was not. I don't agree with her. Mm-hmm. But I do agree that in a hypocritical attempt to tell the world that we are not racist, that we do believe in the equality of man and women and everybody was created equal, they put those in documents when written we were not entitled to call upon, not realizing that someday, Thomas Jefferson said it best. He said, I shudder to think that God is just and his justice will not sleep forever. They didn't anticipate that someday we would be coming, as Dr. King said, we'd be coming for our check. And so that's where the courts come in, because the courts have this document in front of them, and they are there to interpret the document. And lo and behold, look what they said about the document. Look what they said in that document. So what we're doing now is we're continuing the fight.
Right.
Through the laws, through the courts.
Right. And I was talking to some young people the other day, and I was telling them the Black Lives Matter movement is the continuation of work left undone through the civil rights movement.
Absolutely.
And we have to continue that, and we have to continue that work, and we have to support these young people and help steer them and educate them and train them, because a lot of what I see is, especially when you take what a pivotal role in this, and it's almost divine that one of the important cases that Thurgood Marshall took was a case here in Richland County.
Absolutely.
In South Carolina.
Yep.
Chadwick Boseman, South Carolina native.
See, now you're taking it someplace
right.
else. But I got to say this because it's really important, and I'm glad. And thank you for bringing that up. South Carolina is unique because so much of our history, both the good and the bad of our history, was generated in South Carolina. Exactly. I learned every single day about things where South Carolinians were the first for the fight. South Carolinians were, I'm not going to run down the list, but what I'm saying is, of course it would be. And yes, I believe with you, I believe that the hand of God is on this. I'm sorry, I don't care what people say. I believe the hand of God is on this. This young man that we're now, in effect, paying tribute to is also a South Carolinian. Okay? Right. So much of what we have fought for, so much of the impetus of that fight has come from South Carolina. There's a reason for that. And I think the reason for that, again, going on the divine aspect of this, I think that the reason for that is because 60 to 70%, depending on which stats you want to look at, 60 to 70% of all the slaves in the United States came through the port of Charleston. So our ancestors, their blood and their sweat infiltrated the land here in South Carolina. I went to, not too long ago, I was in Charleston, and I went to the slave quarters at two of the plantations. And I felt a vibe there that was, I can't explain it. It was almost depressing. It was so thick in being there. And so no matter what your religious beliefs are, understand this, that I believe that our ancestors lived through us. They said to speak of the dead is to make them live again. And we believed that our ancestors were always there to guide us. And I believe that they guided Thurgood Marshall. I believe they're guiding Chad. And I believe I believe they're sitting right here with us as we talk today. And that's very important, vitally important.
That's deep. I just wanted to do our young people now know, and I remember watching the Black Panther when Chadwick was playing King T'Challa. He was having a conversation with Killmonger, and Killmonger was saying, we need to go to war. And it wasn't Killmonger. It was the other guy, the border, the guy that played. I can't think of his name. He played in Get Out. He was playing the border guard. And he said we could take our guards and we can go help black people all over the world. And he was saying we don't fight. We're not going to be like the outside world. We're not going to be like the colonizers. We're not going to use our weapons to enforce our will on others. And I sit back and I listen to those lines that Chadwick delivered as playing that iconic character of King T'Challa, and I think about the legacy of Martin Luther King and all of our great civil rights icons, that you look at a people that have been abducted, and the first thing that our young people, we have to get rid of the white neoliberal lie that slavery was the first sin. Oh no, it wasn't. No, that's a white neoliberal lie. Oh, they did a whole lot of most. The first sin was in Egypt and abduction of a people. Okay. Then you got to get to slavery after about 12 more sins. Then comes slavery. So it wasn't it wasn't the original sin.
No, it wasn't.
And so we got to get rid of that. And that you look at a people that was abducted from their homeland, brought in chains and bondage and forced to live in servitude and be subjected to some of the worst treatment on a place of the planet, and then to get free and then go through the terror of the Reconstruction era where they ran us out, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and the hanging of black people. And you look at the people, and throughout our history, black people have never created a group like the Ku Klux Klan. We have never created a white black nationalist group that was bent on going out, snatching up white people, killing them. We come from a legacy of love. No matter what was done to our people, we responded in love. But and a lot of times people look at that love as being weak, but we understood the power of love. And that's what I always said, you may be nonviolent, is one thing, but you're not a pacifist. You know what I'm saying? And so what we as a people have to do, we can be nonviolent without being passive. And we always talk, and I heard you mention it, confrontational politics. If you look at Thurgood Marshall, the role that Chadwick played, he was a confrontationalist. Martin Luther King was a confrontationalist. We nonviolent, but we about confrontation. We about, you got dogs and water, we coming. That takes incredible courage.
It does.
And I think a lot what our young people need to understand that's out there marching and protesting, if they tell you when, like you always say, they tell us when to come, when to show up for the protest, what time we can protest, when to leave from the protest, there's the curfew. That's infringing on our First Amendment rights. Exactly. We have the right to assemble.
Absolutely.
I don't care about, a curfew, what? Yeah. No, we are protesting an act of violence toward us, and we might as well call what police brutality is. It's domestic terrorism.
That's all it is.
That's all it is. And right. I believe we should be fighting terror. I believe the war on terror should include, because it does include domestic terrorism, but it also needs to include police terrorism. We got to count that as terrorism. And, with Chadwick playing these iconic roles, I hope people really go back and watch Thurgood Marshall, and because it deals with a court case of a black man wrongly convicted of killing a white woman.
Yeah. And it also tells part of the story with regard to Thurgood Marshall, what a person who really has his eyes on the prize, who has a strategy and a plan, and is willing to stick to that plan until the accomplishment of the goal. One of the things that comes out in the movie that I don't think most people know, I knew because I studied Thurgood Marshall, one of my idols, so to speak, but was the fact that when he got to bring the lawsuit that became Brown versus Board of Education, they didn't want him to represent it. So they said, well, yeah, you're going to be there, but the white guy's going to argue it, okay, at the lower levels, not at the Supreme Court. And Thurgood Marshall said, paraphrasing, of course, but Thurgood Marshall said, okay, whatever we got to do. I brought this lawsuit. I made this happen. But now, in order to don't lose sight of the prize. Okay, I wanted to argue it, but you tell him, because the white judge said, okay, we're gonna have a hearing on this matter, but this counsel will have to argue. Okay, and Thurgood was big enough, he was man enough, and had his eye and never lost sight of the journey or what he had to do. Mm-hmm. And so he said, yeah, okay. And I can imagine what that took for him to say, okay, yeah, all right, because he wanted to get it done. And I think that's what this is all about. And our young people have to understand, and I think they do understand, But sometimes, having been young myself one time, hard to believe at this point, but I understand that there must always be those who you look to for guidance. And not necessarily because of their wisdom, but because of their experience and their knowledge of the game and how the game is played. And so I don't begrudge them their youth. I don't begrudge them their approaches to doing things. I would only ask that they recognize the importance of the strategy that underlines all of this, which will tend to end our struggle in more rapidly. And that is, young people have youth, they have stamina, they have strength. Old people, like myself, have knowledge and experience, but we lack the youth to be able to do the things that knowledge requires if we give them the knowledge while they have the youth. This is over. This is over. And I want to just take off my hat to say that I applaud the work that our young people are doing. The Black Lives Matter movement. All the brothers out there, there's people saying they're not doing this, or brothers and sisters, they're not doing this and they should be doing that. Yeah, that may be true. But let's credit them the fact that they're doing something and they're keeping the fire alive. And as long as they breathe that fire, we have a chance. We need to pull together and make that happen. Chad did what he could do. He carefully selected his roles, and each one of his roles was a groundbreaking personage who contributed in different ways to our struggle. And so I think where we are today is we need to continue with the litigation. We need to continue to bringing lawsuits and make these arguments made, but we also need to keep the pressure on. Even President Obama said the same thing, said don't stop protesting. And we won't. We cannot. We will not.
And I think a lot of times, a lot of the activists, for the great work they're doing, like I said, it was always a three-pronged approach. You had the marches, you had the protests, you also had the pressure put on in the legal and through the courts, and then you had the legislative component of this. And I think a lot of times we forget about, especially when you look at a situation like with Thurgood Marshall, and of course we can't forget the contribution of black women to the movement with Fannie Lou Hamer. Right. We got to put the pressure on the party. This is not about partisanship. This is about ending racism. And a lot of times we overtly attack the system. We're attacking the system, not understanding that we have the numbers within the Democratic Party, not saying it need to be black people in the Republican Party putting the same pressure. But a lot of times we don't put the pressure on the Democratic Party, because if they can prevent us from rising to leadership levels within the party structure, then they prevent us from taking the lead in developing the party's platform. You get a platform that has been whitewashed, and you look at the recent Democratic convention, and we applaud Vice President Biden, we applaud Senator Harris, but what was left out of the convention for all its attempts to be diverse was diversity of thought. We didn't hear from any of the protesters. All these hundreds of young people that are protesting, not just in this nation, but around the world. Where was the voice of the protesters? Where was the voice about ending racism? The voice, because when you look at Chad's role with Jackie Robinson, he played the role of a civil rights legend who took the fight at a different level, in a different way, through integrating sports. And like I said, it has always been a multi-tiered assault. And we all do our own part, but we have to, as political operatives and as activists, we have to remember, we have to put the pressure on the parties, and we have to understand that through the parties, we rise up. Legislative congressmen and stuff, they come up through the parties. Just so happens most black people are part of the Democratic Party. So we have to put the pressure on the white leadership structure to make sure we elect more black leadership at the county level, at the state level, and at the federal level. And a lot of times we forget that component because we get wrapped up in fighting conservatives that we forget about. We still have a whole lot of work, the unfinished work that Fannie Lou Hamer started. It's work in the Democratic Party. It's still racism within the party structure. And we have to realize, just like the Constitution was an imperfect document, a lot of our state parties don't realize that a lot of the platform, a lot of the party rules were still in place by white men who owned slaves, by white men who believed in segregation. Their rules of their party and these procedures are still on the books. And those rules and procedures are only there to benefit white males. We got to do our part at every level to create. If we ever hope to get to a Wakanda, we got to take control, and we got to exert our influence in the party. And we need authentic black voices that speak for black communities, not just speak or spill party talking points or partisan platforms. We need black voices that speak for black faces, that speak with black voices for black people. And I think a lot of that is being lost to partisan propaganda. And I'm a Democrat, but at the same time, I'm a black man first. So my community comes before my party. And, just like the Democratic Black Caucus, people before party. We have to realize that we can't, to continue to fight, we have to continue to fight on all fronts. Within the party, it's still a fight. And a lot of times we forget that when we marching on the state houses and we marching in the streets. We need to be marching in our own parties, because it's still racism and it's still people there. I call them old South Democrats who still believe that black people should be subjugated and we're only fit to knock on doors and make phone calls. That's the only place for black people in the party. And I think it's sad, but we got to come to the realization, if we're going to end racism in our lifetime, we have to continue to fight. And we have to accept everybody has their part to play, but we can't leave no stone unturned. We can't leave racism in place.
That's absolutely true. And, the interesting thing about it, and I think perhaps the most important thing about it, is that, as I mentioned about Thurgood Marshall, is never losing sight of what the prize is. What is the real goal? What are we trying to go? What we're trying to get to is the point of real, true freedom. And that doesn't happen by simply getting the right to vote. Thurgood understood that. All of the people who have come before us understood that. But they were more concerned with getting the ball or getting the baton down to the next runner. That's what they were trying to do. Let me do my part now, and then they'll pick up the race. They'll get us where we go. So here we are. Here's where we are. It's a three-pronged approach with regard to what you've just described, and that's with Democratic Party politics, or politics from our point of view. And that is, the first was to get the vote.
Right.
Okay. The second was to get to be included in the party. All white primaries. Okay. So first we got the vote, first level one. Then level two, we had to defeat the all white primary so we could get the right to vote. And now we're at the third level that I think a lot of people have failed to realize, but you articulated so well. And that is control of the party. Okay, so what do I mean by control of the party? I mean that democracy literally means majority rule. That's what it means. And in many cases, and this is the reason for things like the Ku Klux Klan and the Black Codes and Jim Crow, the reason was because at the end of slavery, in many states, including South Carolina, many states, we were the majority population. Mm-hmm. Now you give this majority population the vote, well, then they're going to rule. But no, we're going to keep them out of the party. Okay, so here's what we have. Ultimately, we reached the point where now we are 66.7% of the Democratic electorate in South Carolina, but we don't control the party.
Exactly.
And we should control the party simply by numbers. So here's what the party does. And you can attribute this to racism. You can attribute it to whatever you want. I don't care. I don't know what's in an individual's heart. So I'm not going to call you racist, but I tell you this. We recognize the existence of racist and racism, and we recognize the existence of racist propaganda and protocols because we are the experts on racism.
Right.
Okay. So here's what happens. Just recently, in fact, I got it in the mail today. They sent out, the South Carolina Democratic Party sent out a mailer with prepaid postcards for you to mail it into the Election Commission to get your ballots, your mail-in ballots. Okay, it was a slick piece of work. I don't know how many pages, fold out, whatever you call them, and it was 2 colors, but it was an expensive operation. And they sent those out to voters who were 65 and older. Okay, when have you seen, or when has anybody seen them do a mailing to invite people or to get people to come and join the Democratic Party in South Carolina? Doesn't happen, because what they want is our output, which is our vote, but they don't want our input, which is particularly at this point in time, is our expertise in recognizing and dealing with and formulating plans and policies to overturn white supremacy. That is the problem presently, and that's why I brought the lawsuit against the South Carolina Democratic Party and the Richland County Democratic Party. And I'm also going to add this because it's really important. The same people that I'm suing now were sued by George Elmore in 1946 in order for us to get the right to abolish the all-white primaries. And that is significant. So what I'm saying is we're at the same point on level 3 that we were in 1944, 1945. And the courts have said, up until this point, the courts have basically said that all of this down to the party leadership level is included in the ability to the constitutional right to exercise your vote. And so I agree with you. But the unfortunate thing is when we get to talk, most often all I get to talk about is the racism or these kinds of issues. The fact of the matter is that we welcome anybody who's going to be allies with us. But here's one thing that we cannot abandon, and that is that we are the experts in this issue. Within the Democratic Party, and I'm speaking specifically of South Carolina, but not only South Carolina, because there are other states and Democratic parties in other states that have black caucuses. In South Carolina, the Black Caucus should be leading the issue now, because globally all they're talking about is racism, police brutality, that kind of thing. And as you well remember, we have been calling for a forum on race since we were organized. And every time we're working on it, we're going to do it, we're thinking about it, we're going to put it together, it never happens. And the reason it doesn't happen is because it will wake people up. And once the people wake up, they will understand that they have control of the party numerically, and that if they only get involved, that they will be able to direct the party. Now, what do we want to do by directing the party? Do we want to do something that would be adverse to the issues or to the ideals of what I'm going to call white democracy? Not necessarily. But what it will be is the people who are the majority shall have the right to determine policies, protocols, and the legal approach and the platform approach for the South Carolina Democratic Party. And once again, South Carolina needs to take the lead. And that's why this fight is so important. And that's why change will not come until they recognize that, until they stop fighting us, until they start giving us our due.
Right. And agree with you wholeheartedly. That goes back to authentic voices. And, you look at back to turning back to Black Panther and Wakanda, and how that the technology was integrated with culture and tradition. And especially when T'Challa walked into the lab, Shuri's lab, she was like, "What are those?" And he said, "I wanted to go old school for my first day." And she's like, "I bet the ancestors love that." And it's that little sibling banter showed the connection with moving forward, but also respecting the ancestors.
Absolutely.
And I think, especially in politics, that although we move forward, we can't forget our ancestors. We got to remember what they went through. And I think we were able to accomplish so much because so many of us were struggling, or so many of us were subjugated or abused, that it was everybody. So we all had to struggle together. What they have done now is they had allowed certain black people to come up through the ranks in the party. And so it's about individual forward trajectory. And it's not about a community anymore. It's about what I can do to better myself and my family. You know, the rest of the community be damned. And we got to remember the ancestors. And, you know, but there are those among us, just like within, you look at Wakanda, you had the tribe that lived in the wood, up in the caves, right. And then you had the other tribe that were farmers. They're going to be different schools of thought for black people, for black advancement. The most prominent example of that was Booker T. Washington and Webb Du Bois. W. Du Bois. Mm-hmm. But South Carolina has a lot of black people that are plantation house syndrome, where their only goal—
that's a nice way to put it.
Plantation house syndrome, where their only goal is to be on the second level of the master's house. That they want to be as close to the master as possible. So they allow themselves to be subjugated instead of standing up, and because they want to be loved by the party. So they don't want to anger the party. And I think back to anytime I'm in politics, and my mentor was the late Representative Joe Neal, and he told me, Michael, no matter what you think, that most of your time is not going to be spent fighting conservatives and Republicans. Most of your time is going to be fighting within the Democratic Party to gain simple rights, to gain simple the ability to govern ourselves, the ability to protect our communities. And I always remember when I was young, I got into politics first. And of course, it was through the Democratic Party, because I started doing voter registration. I wasn't a part of the party, but everybody, I met a person and said, Michael, you need to come work for us at the Democratic Party. Come work for us at the Democratic Party. Come work for us at the Democratic Party. Oh, okay. So I went and I worked for them at the Democratic Party, doing, knocking on doors, doing the phone calls.
Stuffing envelopes.
Yeah, stuffing envelopes. Oh, I'm doing it. I'm doing the work.
You're a good
but
soldier.
I never forget Representative Joe Neal said to me when I met him after a heated exchange about Democrats and about the flag. He said, you need to come work at the State House with me for our people. Come work with me for our people. Whereas the white Democrat said, come work for us for the Democratic Party. And those two incidents always shape my political views. And we as black people have to remember that no matter how good we're doing, it's still our brothers and sisters in bondage. It's still brothers and sisters struggling out here. It's still communities that are hurting. And, and that's why I think in the movie The Black Panther, the conversation between Killmonger and T'Challa was so powerful. T'Challa wanted, I want peace and to protect my people. Killmonger said, no, let's go out, let's fight, let's liberate our brothers and sisters in arms. And he said, didn't all life start in Africa? So ain't all people our people? So why, why y'all eating good and there's millions of our brothers around the world starving? That get to the heart. That's a moral conversation. They were engaging in a moral dialogue, a moral conflict. And I think as black people, we have to remember that we're tied to a legacy, not just as Christianity, not just to the legacy of Jerusalem, but also to the legacy of King, the legacy of Malcolm, the legacy of Rosa Parks. We have to continue the work of our ancestors, and we have to continue that, not about individualism. We have to go back to community. We have to bring up that community, and I think that's in the role that Chadwick played in Black Panther, embodied all that.
Absolutely.
Politics, civil rights, economics, international relations. Go watch the Black Panther again, and you will see all of those things.
And all of the things that you've said are also not only very true, but the fact of the matter is that in that particular production, they covered all of the issues. Right. And in the end, and the thing about it is, you can tell when it's well presented, because I agreed with both of them. I agreed with Killmonger, and I agreed with T'Challa. I agreed with both of them. But in the end, the beauty of it was, and the message that we should walk away from this with, was in the end, T'Challa came around to Killmonger's way. And that is, they came in and bought the houses,
bought the building, buy back the block.
That's right.
Buy back the block.
The other important message in this was that, and I don't know how many people paid attention to it, was when Killmonger said basically, "Damn the ancestors." Do you remember when he grabbed that sister by the throat and picked her up? Okay. I won't say that. That was sacrilege, is what it was. It was sacrilege. But we still did not lose sight of the fact, they still did not lose sight of the fact that that's our brother.
Right.
And that's what we have to remember, and that's what we have to understand. Also, and it was just so full of messages on so many levels. The white guy who came in, who helped them, the CIA guy, okay? They called him the colonizer. Right. They watched him and didn't trust him, but when it came time, he stepped up, and they did not hold who he was against him.
The allies.
Because he was an ally and protected him. So what I'm saying is, this is what we can do. But here's the thing that's important that people miss, and particularly our white brothers and sisters very often miss. And that is that we have never been a people who have been a vengeful people.
Right. Never.
And I maintain that it's just not in us. It's hereditary, as you often say, and I would go as far as to almost say it's genetic. We do not have that vengeful bone in our body. We will fight to defend ourselves. Right. Okay? And it amazes me how much we can take before we'll start fighting to defend ourselves. But the fact of the matter is, because of our background and our cultural heritage, what we were a people who recognized that everybody had to live, and that because under the skin we were all the same. That's why their strategy of divide and conquer, and that's what you just described, divide and conquer, that's why it works so well. That's why it's continued to work generation after generation after generation. I live on the good side of the tracks. Yeah. A choice few will be allowed. We will permit a choice few to come over the tracks. And you can be one of those. And that's what our problem is. Everybody is thinking about, but what we've always recognized, in the end, every advancement that we made was made by pulling together. It's important that we understand that.
Right. And I think it goes back to being able to ascend to leadership roles within the party. If you look like another example of democracy and fairness, you look at when T'Challa was about to assume the throne. One of the things that they did, they stripped the power away from him, and they said, any person of royal blood, I offer you now a path to the throne. That is what not preventing us from getting to a leadership role in the party. They are preventing us paths from the throne, a path to the throne.
Exactly. And what was T'Challa's response? He has the right.
He has the right.
He has the right. So, yeah, I might end up losing. Right. Okay. He might be king tomorrow if he defeats me, but he has the right, and I have to acknowledge that right. And that's vitally important for us to understand.
Right. And it's I look at the part when he was, T'Challa was, after T'Challa had lost to Killmonger, and Shuri and his mother and the CIA officer went to what did he call the guys, the gorilla, the tribe of gorillas? I forget the name, but he went to them.
In the cave, you mean?
Yeah, in the cave.
Right,
he went to them, and he was talking, and the white guy was saying, "Well, let me say this," and they said, "Ooh, you can't speak."
That's right.
You know what I'm
That's
saying?
right.
You don't speak. But I look at that, and I was, you know, I was taken back. I went to a Democratic Party meeting, and you know, it isn't about racism, but you look at the room was full of black people, and all the leadership in the party was at the table was white. Majority of the leadership was white. We was in a meeting in a black community, and you had two or three black faces. One black face was taking notes, but you look at the party's leadership structure is white. It's not about hate, and it's not about racism, but allies have to. If you are a true ally, you would say, we need to help you lead. You know what I'm saying? We need to get out of the way, and that's the problem. I call it casual racism. Casual racism. We don't want you to fight. Let us fight for you. Yeah. You just do what we say do. Let us take the lead.
At the march at the State House on, I think it's May 30th. Yeah, there was a brother came up and was trying to get this white guy to speak. And they had their list of speakers, and what the guy who was in charge of it said, well, we have our list of speakers and we're going to follow that list. Now, if at the end of that, if this person wants to speak, sure, we'll let them speak. We'll have to see. We have to go along with the guideline. The brother who wanted the white guy to speak, the brother was screaming, "No, man, well, that ain't right. You know, you ought to you need to let him talk," and blah, blah, blah. The white guy, never forget it. The white guy said, looked at the brother who was arguing for him, looked at him and said, "I don't want to speak. This is y'all's thing. I don't want to speak." So what I use that as an example to show that there are allies.
There are allies
who recognize that we want to give you all the support we can, but this is yours to lead. It becomes inauthentic if we lead it and they recognize it, and that's important for us to understand. But there are people who, rather than buck the system, and it always starts with bucking the system. Rather than buck the system, they will be glad to take a subservient position and be yes men and yes women to white leadership. And that's a sad thing.
Well, it's not white leadership. Is destructive white leadership.
Okay.
Because there are plenty white brothers and sisters that are allies, and I work with them every day.
Yes, that's true.
And
I agree.
I couldn't be where I am at today if it wasn't for those white brothers and sisters.
Absolutely.
Those allies. But what we do a bad job as a community, we do a bad job at determining who's an ally and who's not.
Yeah.
We just say if you got a D behind your name, you an ally. That is not the case. That is not the case. And we have lost that ability, that confrontational politics. We've lost that ancestors' spirit to challenge the system.
Yeah.
Whatever is done to us and it's not our white progressive brothers. It's not our white liberal brothers. It's our white neoliberal, and they neoliberals, and you know, they are destroying our communities, and they're destroying it through their leadership. Right. And they're directing us over a cliff. And we as a community, if we ever wish to reach on a Wakanda effect, we have to be ready to rise up and fight both in the street politically and in the halls of justice, just like in the halls of the legislatures. We have to continue those fights, and we have to call our leaders to the carpet. It's about accountability. Okay. They should be willing to have a conversation at a place and date and time of our choosing, not have a conversation with black people that they hand select. If you and you know, the party talks about diversity. If you hand selected the black people, that's not diversity.
It's not.
Let the community select them. The party is not the community, and a lot of times the black people, we forget that the party is the party. The party will do what's in the best interest of the party. We as individuals have to do what's in the best
Best
interests of our families and our communities. We have to do that.
Which also is what the party is doing and has always done in terms of its leadership and direction, is looking out for its family and its future, which is fine, and I don't begrudge them that, because what else would you do?
Right.
But what I'm saying is that now is the time for us to start directing the party, simply because we are the majority.
Right, and it's all about radical self-love, because during slavery, we are the only group of people have been taught to hate ourselves. Right. So we have to do what we can to make sure that we love ourselves, and when we love ourselves, then we love our families. And by consequence, we love our community, and we have to get back to loving ourselves and loving our family. I created a whole company because I loved my community. And the question the black community needs to ask these white leaders: do you love me? They have to ask these white leaders: do you love me, or do you love your position in the party? And you will get their answers, and that's what this is about: radical self-love, teaching black people. But Chadwick Boseman, here we go again. He played James Brown, iconic. That's right. Black love, I'm black and I'm proud.
That's right.
We got to be proud to be black again. We got to be proud to be black, because that is killing us. Literally
talking loud and saying
nothing, and you just can't. Disregard the iconic roles that he played.
That's right.
And the people that he played, how they impacted the fabric of this nation and who we are as a people.
And they have. And he was a wise man to select them. He was also a man of integrity and honesty to turn down roles that he felt depicted us in negative fashion. Right. And I take off my hat to him for that as well. I mean, he's a generational figure. There's an old ancient saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And there are all kinds of teachers. Another adage said that in life we have three positions. We are teachers, we are students, and we are equals. If we are teachers, the person to whom you are dealing with should recognize your ability to teach and figuratively sit at your feet as a student would. If the person is a teacher and you acknowledge them as a teacher, that is your position. If the person is a student, the student acknowledges the existence of the teacher and has the respect and attitude of learning. And if we're equals, then we stand shoulder to shoulder and we fight together. That's what we have to understand. And this is not that we did not know it. Our ancestral teaching was always that. Look out for each other. This is all family. We're all in this together. And the most important thing I think I can ever say about the ancestors is that, and this to me blows my mind, at my age it still blows my mind every time I think about it. Can you imagine people, or yourself for that matter, undergoing all kinds of unspeakable pain, suffering, hardship, slavery, disruption of your families, and knowing in your heart that what you were going through was for the sake of someone who would come along, maybe one generation, 2 generations, 100 years from now, who would come along and they would benefit from what you were experiencing now. That's the way our ancestors looked at it. And so for me, we do our ancestors a great disservice by not fighting, because they gave their lives so that we could live. They didn't know who we were going to be. They didn't know your name. They didn't know my name, but they knew that if they suffered, if they withstood the pressure and the suffering, that one day you and I and others would come along, and that one of those people, like Chad and others, would come along and would be the inspiration that would change the course of human events. And that's where we are today. And that's why I thank you for the libation, and our ancestors thank you for the libation.
Well, let's do a toast. To Chadwick and the ancestors.
Wakanda forever.
Wakanda forever.